Welcome back to Inklings Behind the Scenes. This is J.S. Bray, and this is another driving episode. So today I want to mention, one of the things that I think is very important as a creative, as a professional, honestly, just really if you're working in any type of a responsibility, is to know that plans change. Plans change, and how you adapt to this change in life and circumstances largely depends on like if you're going to be successful. There's a famous quote by the really, I'd say, almost infamous boxing legend Muhammad Ali. He said, "People know they know exactly what to do until they get hit," and I believe that that is a very sage point of view, because even if that's not maybe a disaster like getting punched by Muhammad Ali, it's still an interruption to your plans. And while I think having a plan is good, having a roadmap is great, having intentions of things that you want to get done, there is massive amounts of limitation of what you can and can't do. And I'll say this in the real contextual sense right now. So my wife is a kind of a, I would say she's a type A planner. She's the kind of person who, when she sets something in motion, if it doesn't follow through, it upsets her. And now, don't get me wrong. I also am a type of person who likes to plan things, who likes to place things in order. And, I do believe that God is in the details. That's sort of old saying that the importance of details is there. However, for me, I also know that I've lived long enough that if I fight impossible currents in life, then I will be not only unhappy, but I'll be miserable. I'll be absolutely miserable. And so having this idea, like the will to accomplish something, it's great that you have a strong will. Resilience is important, to push through the pain, to push through the difficulty. These things are important for success. No question. No question. They're important to be successful. However, not being able to see everything come through. And I mentioned this in a previous episode about stubbornness. If you feel that your vision or your plans need to follow through to the T, that is sometimes where you are realizing that maybe you're being a bit of a power control freak. Being a control freak is a way for you to really strangle any type of joy. And why does joy even matter? And I want to kind of just slightly get back to this, because joy is an important topic when it comes to creating art. But it's also, so is pain and suffering. But understanding that plans are going to be erupted, they're going to be interrupted, they're going to be sidestepped. If you have children, if you have, maybe you get unhealthy news, you get all sorts of these things that happen. The app doesn't work, the refrigerator broke down, the dishwasher, all these things happen, right? All these things sort of sidestep your plan A. So it's not saying that you should always have a plan B and C. You should be comfortable with the fact that you cannot control everything. And that having a problem-solving skills, like being able to kind of person that can improvise, is far more important than the person that can implement. And so implementing an idea is great. But at the end of the day, you're dealing with people. You're always dealing with people, and you're dealing with people. You cannot control people. You can influence. There are people who try to manipulate, but ultimately you cannot control how other people behave. Any parent knows this. A 4-year-old can bring you to tears where they have this one person defiance against, say, eating breakfast or putting their pants on or wearing their shoes on the right feet. Any parent can attest to this. This is a real thing, that if a child can bring down an empire of success or planning, how much more so can a hangnail or a flat tire or any of these things, knowing that they're going to happen. It's not that you have a perfect plan. It's that you have an adaptable, resilient, and growth mindset. That is important. So understanding that plans are going to change. So for example, I had intended to send out callbacks to voice actors to schedule these about a month ago. And then actually originally it was 2 months ago. Then my son came, and then I had one hiccup after the other. And now I say this not to necessarily excuse my desire to do things on time, but deadlines are like one of my favorite quotes by Mark Twain. Mark Twain said, "I love deadlines. I love the sound of them as they swoosh by or they fly by." That is sort of sometimes the nature of intention and how things change. Now, when you're doing callbacks, it's quite complex. Scheduling everyone to come in and doing a live stream, having an asynchronous team does change things. It kind of complicates the factor, but I am trying to do something new, so I have to be open to the experience. And I have to understand that when you're going to do something new, there are new fruits that new fruits and thorns that you're going to encounter when you're creating new processes. Though I have worked in a remote setting for a very long time, I have not done an open call in this manner before. And so that is something that I realized, okay, and I'm also looking forward to having each person I meet get to know them better. So what I mean is that, this is, I've never done interviews in a public setting before. And by public setting, I mean, like, I've never broadcast, recorded people's interviews. And that's, aside from maybe a research experiment, but that was always with a level of consent. And the point I'm trying to get is that I've never actually seen people in my industry take the time, interview someone that they believe is talented, that could potentially work with their team, and then record that, and then let other people sort of peek at that, like look behind the curtain of how this process works. I also mentioned in a previous conversation about the importance of standing to scrutiny between a subjective standpoint. So by a subjective standpoint, that means something that is largely an internal process, right? A judgment that's made internally, and that may be ultimately weighed on an emotional metric. And emotional metrics are not without importance. Okay, emotional metrics are very important. If you feel a certain way, if that your feeling is a legitimate thing that you should acknowledge. It is subjective. Emotions are subjective. And while emotions are subjective, when you make decisions based on emotions, you have to be willing to be persuaded one way or the other. And this is why I think having plans that are etched in stone, and it's sort of the idea of stubbornness, but the stubbornness that you have where you have to have things done in a certain way, I would say typically falls into sort of two separate categories. You sort of have the perfectionist, right? And then you have the idealist. And I'm making these distinctions just for the sake of this conversation. A perfectionist is someone who has to have it be done in a certain order. A perfectionist is often they are a procrastinator as well. They wait for the perfect circumstances for this to happen in such a way. And so if it's not done in such a way, they have a paralysis of analysis. They don't do the social posts. They don't really brave themselves out there, because the humiliation of being wrong or being imperfect is just far outweighs the so-called treasure that they have of wanting to get something done. One of my favorite quotes by George Millay, who really wrote the book where the series Mad Men was inspired by. He was like the original admin. So that action equals interest. So this idea of having a plan is really about action. The idea that the plan is moving forward. We want to be people of action. That's ultimately how you get things done. However, if you are the perfectionist, you can't place things in action because there's a matter of lack of perfection. You're going to not do it correctly. This is a mistake. Being a perfectionist is not without its virtues, but it is largely going to just basically paralyze you from being productive. You cannot embrace perfection and productivity. Okay, you can do the best you can while being productive, but knowing it's not about being perfect, it's about being complete. And each ideas are going to have room for improvement, especially when they're weighed by subjective decisions, emotional decisions. Okay. Now, the other person I mentioned, you have the perfectionist, you also have the idealist. The idealist is the person who has a grand vision. And this is similar to the perfectionist. So the difference between the perfectionist is that perfectionist is maybe caught up on each blade of grass, right? They want to look at each and every single blade of grass and make sure they're all the correct height and width and color and all those sort of things that go into it. And to be an animator, to understand, I've heard it said that animators are like actors with pencils, more like actors with pixels. But nonetheless, animators are a bit of perfectionists when you want to make things look and act and behave a certain way. And people like polished animation. It's a beautiful thing to see artwork come to life, which is the job of an animator. And it's also a wonderful thing to be able to see your work bring life to emotional connection with people, because emotions are real and they are valuable, but they are subjective. And because they are subjective, you need to always kind of keep that in place when you're going to ultimately die on that altar of a subjective decision. So the reason why I mentioned who looks at each blade of grass, but they look at each sort of empire. It's not as much about building each and every single minute detail. It's about having the grand, big vision ideas. Now, these people, and I can say people, but I really mean these personality traits, these personifications I'm giving right now about what could potentially be a behavior that you have. And the purpose I'm saying of this is so that you realize that I'm not trying to leverage one person versus another. These are just behaviors. And if you get trapped in that sort of behavior or type of thinking, it may kill your productivity. And so the idealist is the person who has to have every grand vision articulated. They want to build the next, innovative solution to X, Y, and Z. Now, I am a dreamer. I am absolutely a dreamer. I love dreaming. I love coming up with potentially innovative and creative and out-of-the-box thinking. I absolutely do. But if I spend the lion's share of my time doing out-of-the-box thinking, I fail to get sort of in-the-box results. And that's what we need. You need a balance between where you're not being a perfectionist or idealist, but you're actually being pragmatic to a certain degree. Being pragmatic is important. Now, this doesn't mean that you need to be a stuffy, only safe kind of person. Now, the point I'm trying to get at is having plans and being pragmatic is important. Having plans and being a perfectionist is also important. But having plans and being able to pivot, that's the key. Can you pivot when your schedules change? So planning all these callbacks has been my sort of frustrating thing I need to get to. And it's not that is insignificant. It's really just rather low on the totem when it comes to certain assets that I'm trying to get done, or dealing with potential investors, or more like internal processes. There's a lot going on, and I don't always articulate this thing because it's almost to the point where I don't know exactly how to document every aspect of this development process. I can only show what I'm trying to show, and that does take time and effort. So I'm going to leave us with this. Why this matters: if you want to be joyful in the work that you do, you need to know that perfectionism has its place, like a tool in a tool shed. There are times to pull out the perfectionist hammer and go to work. Then there's other times to have the idealist mindset. So before you want to map out something, have a bit of an idealist when you're building a blueprint, but knowing that blueprints don't look the same as completed homes. And ultimately, being joyful about what you do is knowing that it's not about perfectionism. It's not about pragmatism. It's about having the ability to pivot with potentially unexpected results. So I do think that knowing this helps me greatly, because then I can look at how a project is developing, and I can also say, hey, this is how I wanted it to go. And anyone who says that they've always had a grand vision and it's come perfectly to fruition is largely lying. I truly believe that they're largely lying to you. They want to make you think that they have all the cards figured out. There's a lot of moving pieces. One of the things that you don't learn in art school is how to do financial projections when you are putting together for investors. You don't learn how to do a pitch deck. That you learn how to create beautiful artwork. And sort of that lack of business acumen or financial literacy that a lot of creatives have, it drastically hinders them, and it makes them get in bed financially with people who don't understand the process and largely don't have the same values. And that's the issue. You want to have a holistic view, a whole view of the whole process. So where I'm getting at with all this is that, so today I would love to challenge you to think twice about your plans. Say, okay, this is wonderful. Now, having a plan set in stone is unless it's a truth, a law, a 10 commandment, is largely going to be a problem for you. Because it's never going to be exactly like it is in your head. Having a vision is like having a North Star. You want to point towards the right direction, but knowing that the journey is different. The most important thing, I believe, is to understand what is subjective and what is objective. If you look in your bank and you see the dollars that are in your bank, it is objectively true that you have X many dollars in your bank. It's objectively true that we have how many hours in the day. It's objectively true to see the limitations that you have as a person are going to be a limit based upon time and treasures and potentially talents. But it's also subjectively true, and by this I mean true, is to look at, say, hey, this is something that I desire. This is a strong emotion. This is a strong reason why I do these things, why I tackle these objective things with subjective things. And so I'm speaking a lot about these sort of wishy-washy things, but I think creatives often get trapped with this idea that their feelings or their heart is the ultimate compass. Wrong. You need to have a why that's bigger than how you feel. You need to have a why that's bigger than just, well, I really love telling stories. Why do you love telling stories? What sort of action, what sort of concrete, what sort of objective things happen from your why? And I think it's a great deal to kind of look at the why a little bit later on in another episode, but ultimately be ready for your plans to shift. If you are a plan A, B, C, D, E, F, G, I think that's also possibly overthinking. I think that's also a realm of perfectionism, maybe over analytical. But ask yourself, if plan A, does it have to be perfect? Because if it has to be perfect, your plan A might not be really a plan A, but it might be a plan A with a lot of control freak behavior that is keeping you from accomplishing something great. So while we're building Inklings from behind the scenes, ultimately my goal is to empower you, to bring you into the fold of what is happening. And where with Inklings, as we're developing this kids series, we're working on season 0. You will be hearing many different updates about season 0 coming along. But what I want to get at, what I really, really want to express is that these plans that we're building, sometimes we're building the plane as we're going along. But my goal is to actually give you an idea of how this process happens. I'm building a roadmap. I'm working with many different wonderful people. We do have a skeleton crew, but my goal is to really invite you to the process. So please continue to reach out to us. I really appreciate your liking and subscribing. I don't expect anything from you other than just that I'm here to serve you. Okay, know that I'm here to serve you, and that while we're building this show, I do pray that it does connect with you. But ultimately, if it does not, that's okay too. We're here to create something new in the kids media realm. And to do that, it does take some courage. It also takes a level of radical candor and honesty about what you don't know, where the gaps lie. I cannot predict the future, but I can tell you, based upon the work that I've done, the past that I've been involved with, that these things are things I'm passionate and capable of. And anyways, the long and the short of it is, I thank you for being here. Please remember that as we're building this, we're not doing this for delusions of grandeur, but to try to create something that has never been done before and to build in the public eye in such a way. So thank you so much for listening. Thank you much for being part of this team. Really, just by listening, you're part of our team. And I do hope you just go forth and have a blessed day.